I remember during my senior year in particular, I had a teacher, my favorite teacher, Mr. Joe Feely. He taught a class called Myths, Dreams, and Cultures. Outstanding class. And Mr. Feely, outside of my parents, Phyllis and John, probably had the most profound impact on the development of my character here. One of the lessons I can remember him continuously beating into our heads as students was, you need to slay your dragons, son. You need to slay your dragons. He used to say it all the time. And what he meant was, you needed to face your fears. Turn, face your fears, overcome them, defeat them. And in that, you'll find strength and direction. And I use those lessons, that lesson in particular, quite often. His message was simple and clear. If something is scary or difficult, there's a reason for that. It's because it's worth it. I've thought back to that lesson many times, and it's paid dividends. One story in particular, I was in my mid-20s, in the early 90s, taking a grad class before I was employed here at the academy. I was going for my master's in teaching. And one of the world history electives, I went the first night and found out that we had to read a 350-page book on the New Deal by the following week. And not only that, we would have a new book every week for 10 consecutive weeks that we would have to read. I remember going home and going, 350 pages on the New Deal, really? Maybe I should drop the course. I was young, I was living in Belmar, I was worried about whether I'd be committed to the course. And I thought back to Mr. Feely's lesson about if it's difficult, there's a reason for that, it's worth it. Fast forward about 9 months, that spring, I graduated from grad school and lucky enough to hear that there's a history position opened at CBA. So the vice principal at the time, who at the time was very scary, Mr. Santonello, he interviewed me. And after the standard interview questions, he said, pretend you're in a junior U.S. History 2 course, and you're teaching the New Deal. What would you do? And I was like, I got this. And I'll never forget that. I don't know if it had any part in me getting the job, but things may have been different if I didn't. I still fall back on that life lesson today. When Mrs. Lebowski asked me to be the speaker today, I have to admit I was thinking of so many reasons why I should say no. School season starting, soccer season starting. I have 3 young kids who play sports. I got a new puppy at home. There's just too many things on my plate. But I thought back to Mr. Feely's lesson, and I said yes, and I'm glad I did. I offer this because I wanted you guys to know how impactful my experience at CBA was, how important it was to the development of my character, and how the enduring lessons learned here, how enduring the lessons learned here have been. I'm confident one day you'll feel the same way. As I said, when Mrs. Lebowski reached out and asked me to speak, and I decided to say yes, I spent a good deal of time contemplating what exactly would be appropriate in terms of what to say. What words of advice could I offer a 16 or 17-year-old young men about to embark on an exciting and challenging time in their lives? I thought back to my days here at the Academy in the 80s, and I asked myself, if I could somehow go back in time and communicate with a 1980s version of myself, we'll call him 80s Dave. What would I say? Now, I know what you're thinking. I had no idea Mr. Santos majored in fashion. That's from the J.C. Penney Lumberjack Casual Collection. You're probably also thinking, how do I get my hands on that sweater? You're going to have to wait in line because Jack Conway's got dibs already. What words of advice would I have for 80s Dave besides lose the mullet and buy Microsoft stock? I'd start by telling 80s Dave to be a better friend and classmate. I tell him to enlarge his circle of friends, to be more inclusive, to go out of his way to reach out to someone who may be in need of a friend. And then to focus on developing those relationships. The bonds you form here at the Academy, I promise you, will last you a lot longer than you realize now. I would tell 80s Dave to be a better son, to perhaps help around the house without being asked, to not be afraid to tell his parents how much they mean to him and that he loves them. I tell 80s Dave to be a better brother. After all, friends come and go in life, you'll learn that, but your family will always be there. I tell 80s Dave to commit more time to his studies and to take advantage of all that his talented and devoted teachers have to offer. I know I didn't always do this myself in high school, and I actually have some visual proof of that. But before I cue up the next visual, let me add some context. My favorite teacher, Mr. Feely, used to have a get-out-of-jail-free card, or get-out-of-jail-free option on his quizzes. What this meant was you were allowed to, one time only, place a large check on the top of your quiz where you admitted you didn't do the reading. Rather than try and BS your way through, you were admitting that you were unprepared and you took your 10 out of 50 like a man. When my parents moved out of my childhood home years ago, I found this in one of the drawers. It's difficult to see. The pages have faded, but the message is not. At the top you can see the check, which for some reason I went over about 8 or 9 times. I guess I wanted to make sure he saw it. And then underneath it, it says, "Forgot about test till this morning." Mr. Feely responded, that's his handwriting in the green. "Later in life, will you go to work having left the stove on? Will you forget your wife's birthday? Will you not see the red light as the little girl crosses the street? Awaken, Santos. Life is for living. Evolution eliminates the sleeping." It's a lesson I've taken with me. The main lesson I like to take from this and that I offer to you is that there's always time to change the road you're on, academic or otherwise. Clearly, I battled periods of laziness in high school, but I like to think that I've changed, I've matured, I've become a better student, and ultimately a better person as a result. I changed the path I was on, and so can you. I would tell 80s Dave, I know you want me to put the picture back up. I would tell 80s Dave that even though there are going to be dark periods of inner turmoil ahead, times when he'll feel alone and friendless, to know that everybody goes through it and that he's not alone and that life will get so much better. I tell him that things that seem so important when you're a teenager, you'll laugh at how little they actually mean once you become older and wiser. And I remind him that in those tough times, you always have your family and your brothers here at the Academy to turn to. And lastly, I offer to 80s Dave the lessons learned in Jeffrey Marx's very powerful book, Season of Life. If you haven't read it, please do. And this is for adults and CBA students alike. In a nutshell, it's a true story about an outstanding high school football coach from Baltimore named Joe Urban. And it's a game changer. Perhaps the most important lesson to take from it is how Coach Urban defines the term masculinity. Coach Urban suggests that the commonly understood definition of masculinity is a dangerous one because it teaches the wrong lessons about what it means to be a man. The problem is that it sets men up for tremendous failure in our lives because it gives us this concept that what we need to do as men is compare what we have and compete with others for what they have. Over time, the natural conclusion is that masculinity is only about athletic ability, sexual conquest, and as adults, economic success. We compare, we compete, and that's all we ever do. And in the end, it leaves men feeling isolated and alone, and it destroys any concept of brotherhood or community. Coach Herman offers a simple but powerful solution. His own definition of what it means to be a man. He calls it strategic masculinity, and it's based on only two things: relationships and cause. Masculinity, first and foremost, needs to be defined in terms of relationships, in terms of the capacity to love and be loved. It comes down to this: what kind of friend are you? What kind of son are you? What kind of husband are you? And ultimately, and perhaps most importantly, what kind of father are you? Success and true masculinity comes in terms of those relationships. His second point is that we all need to have some kind of cause in our lives, some kind of purpose that's bigger than our own individual hopes, dreams, and desires. And this message is so Lassallean in nature. After all, one of the core principles of a Lassallean education is this concept of service to others. The idea that you enter CBA to learn, but you leave CBA to serve. And at the end of our life, we should be able to look back from our deathbed and know that somehow the world is a better place because we lived, we loved, we were other-centered, we were other-focused. I would tell 80s Dave that these two concepts need to be at the center of his universe. And it's there that he'll find true contentment and happiness. And finally, I tell 80s Dave the same thing I said to you guys during my morning reflection back in the spring. That high school offers you the unique situation where final impressions don't matter. Where first impressions don't matter. The only thing that matters is your final impression. What I mean by this is that your teachers and your parents won't remember their first impression of you in high school, the perhaps goofy and aloof freshman and sophomore you once were, but rather they'll only remember the final impression of you. They'll remember the mature young man you turned into on that graduation day in May of 2021. My advice to you: spend the next 2 years of your life working on that final impression, working on becoming the Christian gentleman you want to be remembered as. Again, I thank you for asking me to speak today, and I wish all of you best of luck in your junior year and beyond.